Good evening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that incredibly powerful film as much as I did. My name is Michelle Gray, and I'm the Director of Programming for the New York Times live conversation series TimeTalks. For 20 years, TimeTalks has paired New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest minds from the fields of film, theatre, music, art, politics, and social justice. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event with the film's director, Stephen Mang, lead NYPD 12 plaintiff Edwin Raymond, Officer Richie Baez, NYPD 12 lawyer Emka Nakoro, and private investigator Manuel Gomez. In a time when injustice is pervasive, we must extend our deepest gratitude to those who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it comes at great cost to them professionally and personally. Tonight's guests have all made huge sacrifices, standing up for their beliefs and values to make this world a better and more just place for us all. Moderating tonight's conversation is Charles Blow, a journalist, commentator, and op-ed columnist for the New York Times who writes about politics, public opinion, and social justice. Please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Charles Blow, Stephen Mang, Richie Baez, Edwin Raymond, Emka Nakoro, and Manuel Gomez.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow.
Well, that was nice.
Wow.
You guys are still perky after 2 hours. I was worried. All right, so this is the format. They gave us like 45 minutes. For some reason, we don't have Q&A tonight. And we're just gonna have a conversation with the cast. Now you know, well, the cast, subjects of the documentary. Now you know them from what you've seen there. But I want to just jump in and just have each of you catch us up with how your lives have changed since filming stopped, which maybe a year ago?
That's right.
Right. And if you could just catch us up with where we are with the quota system and where the city is relative to that.
Sure. Well, I first want to thank you, Charles, and the New York Times, and our distributor, Hulu, and IFC Films. This is an unbelievable moment to bring the film here. And I just want to also acknowledge a couple of amazing people that this film would not have happened without the support of executive producer Laura Poitras, somewhere out here, has been a staunch supporter for us for years. And then my long-term collaborating partner, Ross Tuttle, I think is somewhere out here as well. And then Detective Derek Waller is also in attendance. So, you know, the quota is banned by 2010 state law, and there is still evidence of obviously ongoing quota-driven practices, and it was an incredible experience watching these individuals uncover this over the years. I came to this film by way of a couple of journalistic short pieces and a 1-hour film about stop and frisk, and so when things seemed that they were supposed to sort of turn a corner after the federal hearing, and didn't, officers Adil Polanco and Pedro Serrano, who Ross and I had been filming anonymously as silhouetted informants in those pieces, decided that it was time to step forward, be more transparent because of the ongoing practices. And it's been astonishing to me to see all of the efforts and the sort of like kind of radiating story of all these other individuals, officers, private investigator, come into the fold over the years.
To answer your question regarding the quotas, it's still there. They just changed the name. Now they call it performance objectives. So they put a different hat on the pig. The cops are still required to do, between 20 and 30 summonses a month which generates millions for the city, as you saw in the film. That's still ongoing. You can actually go online and look up the NYPD Patrol Guide, and you'll see that performance objectives section is in there. As a matter of fact, I have a police sergeant right there who can verify that. This film has done a lot of positive for me in the sense of it's helped me show the prosecutorial misconducts and also to work with these guys and these officers who are also heroes to be able to expose these injustices that we're all besieged by. I mean, many of us don't know that, well, many of us know that the police department is the largest police force in the world, NYPD, and 38 states emulate and copy our procedures. So this is why you see the same systemic problem in all these other states. And this film addresses that, but not only does it address that, it also shows that there is a potential solution. And I'll get to that later on when my brothers all speak. But again, it's affected me because now they put my picture up in every precinct. The last guy they did that to.
Does it say wanted?
No. They actually said not to speak to me. So the last guy they did that to was Lucky Luciano and Al Capone. So I'm right in that category with them, unfortunately. But it's been a real positive experience because now this is open doors. And now the NAACP has gotten involved with me and reached out to me. And I've had a platform to speak in other states to put an end to this systemic problem that we are all besieged by.
Well, thank you, Charles, for that question. With respect to how the movie has changed my life, not much, really. I still do the same things I do. Quotas do exist. They're still there. There's a difference in the way that the NYPD brass approaches quotas. They've just changed it, they've tweaked it slightly, but it still affects the cops. It doesn't have an effect on me per se, and it might not have an effect on you, but it definitely has an effect on the police officers that are still in the force, and it will trickle down to you eventually. I currently represent police officers who complain about being forced to enforce the quota today as we speak, despite the cosmetic changes that you see on television.
Thank you, Charles. Sorry. Before I start speaking.
I thought you give me a charge.
No. Before I answer the question, I'd like to give all praises to my Lord and Savior Christ. And yes, quotas are still alive and well. What they're doing right now, they're influencing the newer cops, the newly hired cops that's on probation for 2 years.
That's right.
And basically, when they're on probation, they can get dismissed or fired for any reason, and they will have no union backing. So they do that to newly hired cops and also newly promoted supervisors like sergeants, lieutenants. Once they get promoted, they have a 1-year probation. And if they don't meet the numbers, they can get demoted back to, if they're a sergeant, they're demoted back to the cop. If they're a lieutenant, they're demoted back to a sergeant. So that's how they keep the quota system alive, by putting that pressure on these supervisors and cops.
All right, thank you, Charles, and thank you for everyone who decided to spend the evening here. You could have been doing anything else. So as the lead plaintiff, I've been doing a lot of public speaking about this issue for the last 2 years. So I've already been in the spotlight, and that comes, it's a heavy burden to be in the spotlight for this very controversial topic that's kind of swept our nation in the last few years, since Trayvon Martin. So in terms of change, I'm kind of used to the spotlight at this point. So that hasn't changed much, although I know in 2 days when the film is national, the burden is only going to get heavier. In terms of quotas, over 1,000 officers have contacted me in 2 years and shared with me anecdotes, things that are happening in their respective commands, all throughout the city and even other parts of the nation. So unfortunately, as my attorney said, there is the facade that has changed. There's a cosmetic switch, but it's under the surface, it's still the same.
So there were 12 of you in this suit. You have 1,000 people have contacted you. You say you have active clients. But as you say, the New York City Police Department is the biggest police department in the world for a city.
Yes.
So that means that there are 100? How many?
36,000.
36,000?
Yes.
Officers?
It's considered a small army.
Small army.
It is the largest in the world.
So how does the department internally reconcile the fact that crime has gone down as the amount of money we get from summonses has gone up because there are more of them, and as the crime went down, our stop and frisks skyrocketed? Do they look at that and say, this is why? Or do they, how do you justify the generational cultural injury that the NYPD is inflicting on Black and brown communities?
Well, it starts with the broken windows theory. So when Bratton, on his first term under Mayor Giuliani, when he became the commissioner, people really bought this as something that was effective, something that was essential. And because crime did go down during its application, but if you pay attention, crime actually had already started plummeting under Mayor Dinkins. Exactly. It only continued in the trajectory that it was already in. Mm-hmm. But that coinciding with broken windows, they get to brag about that. They get to say that, you see, that's the broken windows working. So this is why the idea of over-enforcing innocuous infractions as a way of stopping bigger issues, this is why people kind of bought it, because, look at Times Square. The city does change. It goes from the Times Square that, most of us remember to a Disney Times Square. So, for the most part, that's what justifies it. That's what's used to try to justify it. As you said, look at the results ever since we've applied this policy. But in reality, because today, in the last 2 years, actually, stop and frisk numbers are extremely low compared to the climax, which was 2011, 686,000 stopped. Last year was less than 10,000. And yet the department takes credit for that. And they're in no moral position to take credit for that. Because when the judge had ruled, they fought it. Mayor Bloomberg appealed it. The first deputy commissioner and Ray Kelly both wrote op-eds blasting the judge, saying that she's going to be responsible for returning New York to the bad old days. But yet today, Mayor de Blasio's administration takes credit for the lower stop and frisk numbers.
I want to say that, like I said, the summons situation, it never stopped. It's been this way. It's been this way since the time of Serpico. He talked about that. And this is the problem. It's never changed. It just went underground. And now the problem is so big that it's destroying so many lives of the fabric of our youth. Because the problem is a lot of these kids are getting stopped for bogus reasons, and then they're pleading guilty when they're innocent. And this is what I get. And I get hundreds of calls, all right? And this is, in the past 2 years, I must have received at least 600-700 phone calls regarding that. There's a point where I can't even take on all these cases. And there's so many children. This is why, I was inspired to draft a legislative proposal, a template, to create a new agency called the Department of Civilian Justice. And then I went with Steve to meet Frank Serpico. And I said, hey, Frank, look at this. And he looked at it and he says, hey, kid, I went everywhere and they still didn't change anything. Mm-hmm. Listen to that. Mm-hmm. And they didn't change nothing. This man spoke on every newspaper in the world. The movie made hundreds of millions, and what change did we get from it? We don't have a police department with oversight. You can't check yourself, correct yourself, and monitor yourself. Listen, we got a president of the United States.
I knew
Not
it was
to be
going to
quick-
come up eventually.
I didn't mean to go there, all right? But I'm just saying that, you know,
Don't
if the
open that kind of water.
all right, I'm not. But I just want to use it as an example. No offense to anyone, and that is that if we can have oversight over the president's actions, and the federal Supreme Court can say, hey, you know what, you can't do that, and correct him, why don't we have that here? And this is why I wrote that proposal. So now it's being addressed, and because of this film, this is how it's changed my life. The NAACP reached out to me, and now I'm going to be speaking September 18th with them to nationally support this. And they're actually here in the audience, some of them now. And, you know, we need to have a change. And it's too long where you got guys like Edwin, this gentleman right here, my brother Derek in the audience. And what are they doing? They got nowhere to go. Where does he go to report that corruption? You can't have a department check itself, monitor itself, correct itself, and punish itself. If we have a system of checks and balances for the president, why don't we have it for the prosecutors, the corrections department, and the fire department, and the police department?
I wanted to add something, you know, one of the really surprising things to me about this whole process was that over the years, the department has actually more openly acknowledged some of the issues at hand, and yet has kind of tried to embrace this idea that they're addressing them with reform measures. And so there's this real kind of like illusion or dichotomy between the perceived reality and then the truth on the ground. And this was a class action lawsuit by a group of officers of historic proportions. This is the largest class action lawsuit charging the NYPD of violating state law and the 14th Amendment, and by a group of officers that active duty. You've never seen this in the city or nationally, and yet this is a story that, you know, nobody heard about. Many people in New York weren't even aware of that. And, you know, that's because there's a tremendously powerful public information, entity to the NYPD. You see that with powerful corporations. You see that with this public institution, where, you know, you're going to be exposed to way more pictures of like cops who are obsessed with playing basketball with young black children, smiling always, you know, and then ever get to see claims like these officers who are not anti-police, they're not lazy. These are, you know, Edwin, Richie, everyone, Derek, these are the cops that the department should celebrate because they joined the force with the belief of the noble pursuit of what policing could actually be. You know, they grew up seeing firsthand, their communities decimated by crime, and they wanted to go out and help fight that, and yet we're being asked to do otherwise on the job. And so I think it's, it harkens to that, like James Baldwin line where, nothing that is, not everything that's acknowledged can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it's acknowledged. And this is a group of people who have been unacknowledged, in fact, squashed as a result, retaliated against, because they pose a threat to the public image of this department. And yet what they're fighting for is to bring back legitimacy and respect to the uniform and protect and serve, as individuals like Sir Robert Peel, who Bratton, is a student of and sort of touts the 9 principles of policing, these very noble ideals around law enforcement. And yet that, it's sad to say, is a little bit of an illusion or smoke and mirrors.
Talk to us a little bit about what you hope the film does, particularly on this point of kind of public information warfare, but also public responsibility. You talked about at the height of Stop and Frisk, they were stopping nearly 700,000 people a year. These were mostly, almost exclusively, young black and brown men. So I did an analysis of that myself. And at that time, they were making more stops of young black and brown men than there were young black and brown men in New York City. Not funny, because that meant that if my kids weren't getting stopped, somebody took that stop for them. They had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And 9 out of 10 of these, or slightly more than that, never were charged with anything. They hadn't done anything wrong. And you imagine this kind of trauma multiplied over and over, and that's 1 year. These are the same pool of people for the next year of 600,000 stops, right? So then they do it all over again. And so some people, so kids were racking up 12 and 14 stops for frisk, never done anything wrong. And at the height of this, every year of this, Quinnipiac polled the citizens of New York City and asked them if they were okay with this. And every single year, a majority of white people said they were perfectly okay with this happening. And that goes to this public information thing, but also goes to public responsibility. Just because you don't have skin in the game does not mean you don't have a moral responsibility in the game. And so what do you hope this film does to change that dynamic? Because the only reason that this happens is because the public says it's okay. They don't go to the polls and say, that was not okay with me, you can't be reelected. They don't show up at City Hall and say, we won't have this. They say, this is okay with us. That's why it happens. So what do you hope the film does to change that?
Well,
go ahead, brother.
So, we're in a midterm election year, and folks have to take advantage of that. If the elected officials, whether they be incumbent or those trying to get elected, know that this is what's on the voters' minds, they'll be forced to pay attention to this issue, draft legislation, or do something. So I'm hoping that the film brings this issue to enough people that probably were ignorant to it, so they can understand that this is what they should be pressuring their elected officials with.
Well, I am pressuring them. All right. So I'm not gonna, my brother from another mother, Edwin, he's right. We have to go to the officials. We have to go to you, all of you. You need to spread this word. You need to start conversation. Like Steve said, he wanted this film to do dialogue. Am I correct?
As a starting point, sure.
Yeah, and we need to get out there and get involved. When you see a hearing with either Edwin or myself or any of the 12, come support us. Come down, come to City Hall, because we're trying to make that happen now. I'm actually in talk with a few council members and also Senator John DeFrancisco in regards to having a hearing in Albany to address this issue. Because, like you said, it does affect people of color and so forth, and it destroys the very fabric of our youth. It really does. And this systemic problem is ongoing. You can see it in LA, you can see it in Detroit, you can see it in Baltimore, you can see it in Washington, D.C. Matter of fact, we were talking in the back, and Edwin was having a conversation, and it's going on in Australia. Am I right about that, Edwin?
Well, I was the one that said that.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, it's going. No, we look alike. We're from the same island. Yeah. It's like what happened in New York in the time of Giuliani and Bratton's first term. It basically, a lot of crimes was going down, a lot of violent felons was put away for a long time, and every city wanted to replicate it. Mm-hmm. So what happened was cities like Toronto, London, Melbourne, Australia, they basically try to copy the CompStat system over in their respective cities and hoping to achieve the same results. And to add on, what we want this film to do is to open everybody's, not only their eyes, but their conscience, and to make them want to do the right thing all the time. Because you know what? What will you do if this was happening to your child, or your grandchild, or your nephew, or your sister, so forth and so on, or your friend? You want justice. You want people to be treated the same way wherever they go, regardless of their color, race, religion, creed, so forth and so on. You want everybody to be treated equally, just like the way it says in the Constitution, that all men are created equal.
And on this film, you saw the part about Pedro Hernandez. You only see that one case, but just to give you a little background, he was arrested 8 times, and I proved him innocent 8 times. And now those other 2 kids that are on there, Angelo Cotto and Antonio Cotto, which you saw him talking about, with me talking with them about with a gun, One brother was arrested 9 times, and the other one was arrested 8 times, and all of them were dismissed. I mean, it's just this is a systemic pattern that keeps going on from neighborhood to neighborhood. And I've been going all over the boroughs, and I see the same thing. Pedro is just a hair on the problem of the head.
And do you think people understand, like, the tremendous interruption of a life that 8 stints? I mean, whatever schooling you were doing or wanted to do, or that can't happen. Whatever job you had, wanted to get, were pursuing, that can't happen. And I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like people don't fully register that this is happening right around you while we kind of, sip our $8 lattes and our $80 yoga pants, and we don't register that this is happening in your name, in your city, to people who have lives just like you and your kids. But we don't have enough outrage about that happening. What is Pedro's life? Like, how does he start all over again? You have to start over. Like, you go to jail,
Yeah, I mean, his life was, he in the beginning, he wanted to kill himself, like Khalif Browder. And I actually went to the jail at least 5 times a month. I would spend 3 to 4 hours with him and talk to him. And then I came up with a plan. I says, you know what? You better volunteer for the school programs in here. You better do all the studying, tell him you need tutoring, whatever. And I would get him 12 hours out of the day out of the cell into a learning environment. Now, he did something that I never planned ever happening. He went and got a 4-year college scholarship in jail.
Nice.
And that's,
one of the things that I marvel about is that, these guys follow in a long history of other whistleblowers who have tried to actually do the exact same thing. Adrian Schoolcraft, thrown in a psych ward for 3 days, Craig Matthews. And part of the problem is that there's we live in an era now, of course, of like the malleability of truth. And at the same time, there's also this other problem that falls on all of us, as citizens, that there's not any kind of sustained conversation about what we know exists in plain sight, right? That the criminal justice system is actually a criminal injustice system. And part of what's happening is that I think, to answer your question, that, it's not only this idea of like dehumanizing people like Pedro and also officers like the NYPD 12, but it's also that we don't ever see them as like human individuals' stories where you are a brother or somebody's mother or a son or a daughter. And I think that that's a really important thing to bring back to the conversation. In addition to the fact that these guys, they speak with the most authority that one could have on police reform, and yet up to this moment, it's only been sort of the anti-cop versus pro-law enforcement sort of binary that people think that's the battle that's being waged. These are individuals that they care deeply about reform, and they know exactly how to reform, not just this system, but the national one. And as you see in the film, it's a tough, gap to close, because not even community members who know they're whistleblowers have an easy time embracing them. And that's because there's been this radical dehumanization. And I think, one of the things I hope for the film to do is to just demonstrate that, we understand and can unpack trauma and also adversity when we put it into narratives. And, we don't want those narratives to be too tidy, but, people need stories in order to understand human struggle. And I think this is a story that, they bravely have shared for the first time, that, law enforcement who know how to fix the system should be invited to help do that.
One of the most important things I want to see this film, 2 things I want to see come from it. One is that it resonates with every single cop across the United States, and it lets them know it's okay to speak up. It's okay to speak out against corruption. It's not just Serpico in the 70s. We can do it too. And you're supposed to do that. We swear the oath. I swore that oath. The second thing I want to see it do, this film, is I want to see it bring about social change and change this subculture of injustice within the departments nationwide. And I hope it brings about awareness.
Well, how do you guys see the overlap or connection between the reforms you want to see and the reforms that movements like Black Lives Matter want to see, and how this sort of system, someone in the film says the last thing you want to be is a cop who's desperate at the end of the month to meet a quota because he's dangerous.
Yeah.
And how do you see that interconnection? Because I'm always struck by how many of these shootings begin as routine traffic stops or routine broken window stops. So they're always in a car, or is Eric Garner and some loose cigarettes. It's always a very minor thing that kind of spirals. So how do you guys see the connection?
So what you mentioned, that's the systemic root. The fact that Philando Castile, for instance, in Minnesota, the justification for the stop was a broken taillight, and he ended up getting killed. So that's the systemic root of the issue. A lot of times activist groups, they don't necessarily, their view of the systemic issues is the lack of accountability, not the root, So they feel as long as we have accountability, it'll deter others from making these type of decisions and things would be better. Whereas in the film and the type of reform that we're trying to bring is attacking it from the root, that initial point of contact.
Right.
So that's a big difference there.
One of the other things is, I hope it comes up that the police commissioner sees this himself. There's a scene in there with Derek. He's at the bodega and guys going bananas. We need to bring back that kind of policing, that type of community policing where, Officer Henry is on the corner and officer, those guys don't belong here, or they're bad guys from the neighborhood. When you're walking the streets and getting to know the community, or helping the old lady up the stairs with her groceries, or the old man coming out the building, and you're walking the street, not driving a car. That's the problem. If you look around now in your communities, most of the cops are driving. We need to go back to the beat cop, that they're interacting with the community, talking with the people, and that the people can build that trust again. And that's what Derek was doing in the film. I mean, they come up and shake his hand and they kiss this guy, You don't see that too often, and we need to bring that back. Yeah. And I hope this film does that.
So Steve, I know you know like the economics of this. I want you to explain a little bit that to the crowd, but part of the problem, as your film highlights, is that police departments have been turned into economic engines. Mm-hmm. And into economic engines. And part of the reason, part of the disconnect with the public is that they are not connecting the fact that politicians are just cowards. And so they could either, right? So they could either cut some service, and make up a budget gap, and conservatives would like that, or they could raise taxes, and maybe liberals would like that, but they do neither, and they turn to you guys and say, we need to hit a number because this is literally in the budget. Yep. This number for summons is literally a budget line for next year. So this is not like, this is what we receive, this is what we expect you to deliver.
That's right.
And so every time people say like, well, it really doesn't have anything to do, it's really sad, but it's not having anything to do with me. Yes, actually the tax dollar that they didn't ask you for, they're bleeding it out of the flesh of some black kid in Bed-Stuy. So talk to them about the economics.
Sure. The approach of this film was not to be like a dialectic about stats, numbers, and policy, but to that point, the city gets to benefit from over 700,000 quality of life summonses per year, and yet there was between 2007 and 2015, as you saw in the film, over 900,000 summonses that were dismissed for lack of probable cause. And so you have to ask, well, where do things fall apart? Because there's kind of a tremendous pressure to maintain the revenue streams as they come in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, multiple ones. Parking, by traffic agents bring in alone $545 million a year, and that's just traffic agents who are employees of the department. And the
Which also fall disproportionately on minorities. I mean,
in some situations. But anyway, the thing I wanted to say was that, like, where that falls apart is officer discretion.
Yes.
And when you have a system like CompStat, which the department will defend as an effective, like, criminogenic analysis system, right, every month, but what, the word on the street that people, understand that meeting to be about is, a reaming of precinct commanders when they don't meet the arrest and summonses and are not addressing on an accounting level the crime. And so when there's tremendous pressure to match a number to a number, there's a loss of humanity and there's a loss of sort of that essential mission that the social contract, which is something that Edwin talks a lot about, between law enforcement and the public, because you're not supposed to answer to the department. You are a servant of the public, and that pursuit of a number and a certain kind of productivity is a very dangerous element. And when you lose officer discretion, summonses become arrests all too easily. And a day of serving and trying to create and build relationships with the community becomes a pursuit of revenue sustenance.
Our police officers right now, currently, and Edwin can verify this with me, are in fear. Because if they don't get those 25 summonses every freaking month, they are put on performance monitoring. And this is the weapon that the department uses to punish them, take away their overtime, take away their vacation time, change their tours to 12 o'clock at night for the single mom who's raising a kid, or, just put him in the most horrific areas or put him in the most dangerous areas. And then it also prevents you from being promoted, performance monitoring. It is a weapon. This is why these cops, he just said that it's police officer discretion. He's right, but the problem is the police department is taking away their discretion. They have to write it. They have to go out of their way and summons you, and you, and you, and you. Because if they don't, their job is on the line. And this is the problem. Our cops are in fear. Again, this was said by Serpico in the 70s. It hasn't changed. It really hasn't, except now you're seeing it on film.
And what impact does this have on the recruitment and retention of minority officers? If you are in the community and this has happened to you, your friend, your cousin, your brother, your sister, whatever, and you've seen this and it's not right and it's not fair, is it a draw to go in and try to change the machine from the inside, or do people just say, I don't want to have anything to do with that corrupt system?
Well, let me answer it this way. When it comes to the 250, it affects stop and frisk. Sorry, this police jargon. We call it 250. Stop and frisk. It affects people that don't even go to jail or get summons. Because I have friends that are currently cops right now that they missed a few classes because they were stopped. Stop and frisk, and that stopped them in the application process.
Yep.
Because they had explained to the investigator why you stop and frisk. So it affects them in that way.
Wait, so it's recorded even if you not issued a summons?
Yeah.
That was the issue.
It was the
Civil
issue.
Liberties fought it. They weren't.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, you just finish your answer.
Yeah. So, like you said, it was recorded, they fought it. They used to keep a database of it. Now they keep it allegedly for a little bit, and then it's supposed to be destroyed. And
So they kept a database of nearly 700,000
more. Every year, they kept a database of it.
innocent.
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Wow.
And most cops do come with the intention of doing the right thing to help the community. But what happens in the academy was they teach you, they brainwash you. They tell you, listen, when you go on patrol, don't listen to the cops that's already there. Don't listen to the senior cops. Listen to your supervisors. Because the senior cops there are do-nothings. They're lazy. You are better trained, better educated, and better motivated than this guy. So they create that divide between the new cops and the old cops. And they keep on doing it with each new class of cops that come in. I don't know if I lost you guys or answered your question.
So
I'm just kind of blown away right
yeah, so Charles, so it's funny because I have 10 years now, and I knew I wanted to become a police officer when I was about 19, 20 years old. And people in my neighborhood, I'm from Flatbush, Brooklyn, they thought I was crazy. They said, why would you want to join them? Look what they do to us. And when I still went with the decision and I became a police officer, there are people in my old neighborhood who didn't speak to me until the New York Times article came out.
Wow.
That's when they learned that, okay, you remain true to who you are. Because once you put on that uniform, the assumption is, knowing what you know, understanding these experiences firsthand, you still choose to join them. So this treatment deters many people from ever thinking that being a police officer is a career choice that's realistic for them. So it's unfortunate. We lose a lot of great people. Common school that many people in law enforcement go to is John Jay. And a good amount of people from John Jay do go on to be police officers, but there are many that, once they see what the job is about, they want nothing to do with it.
So then how do we fix this if it's causing such a scar in the community? It creates a difficulty with recruitment. Internally, you guys found that it's very hard to fight the corruption from the inside. There's not nearly enough pressure from the public saying, this is outrageous, we won't have it. How do you guys see it playing out? How does it get fixed? Does it get fixed?
Well, the film is unprecedented. So it's, as a student of history, I kind of just referenced something that happened. With this film, we're literally cutting through the thick. We're in many real ways the pioneers of whatever's to come. I believe the film will influence more whistleblowers. I believe it will. I'll tell you, last year, there was an officer who was sitting in the police car, and she was just killed simply for wearing the uniform. And I attended the funeral in the Bronx, and there was a young man who approached me, and he said, I was in college when your article came out, referencing the New York Times article. And he said, I didn't want to join the department, but after reading the article, I realized that I needed to be in this department. So I hope that's just a microcosm of what's to come and what the film can bring.
But again, we need oversight. That's the main thing. It has to have oversight. There is none.
And is there, on the horizon, a mechanism that you see realistically coming into being for oversight?
Yes.
Anybody?
Well, here's the thing. Is it going to get fixed? Yes, for sure. It's an incremental process. The reason why there isn't any communal pressure to change that is because it's not a sexy subject. It's not dramatic. It doesn't shout at you. It's not like somebody getting shot. There'll be a video on YouTube in the next couple of minutes, and everybody will want to protest that. This is insidious. It happens a lot over time, and the effect is not easy to categorize. In the same way, it can be fixed by any dramatic measures. The movie is not going to fix it. A law can change it. Like the civil rights laws did in the 60s, over time it changed society. The 2010 law that tried to fix it was flawed. It had too many holes in it. And because of that, it's not effective. But there will be a new law. There'll be other laws. And let's not get it twisted. Things are improving. The quota system is slowly getting better. It's not all bad. Like the current police administration, the brass is slightly better than the last one. So, no, it's true. So the current commissioner definitely presents way better than his last two predecessors. And I'll give you an example. Commissioner Bratton says, these guys are just lazy bums. Don't listen to them. What they're saying is not correct. Commissioner O'Neill says, this is a problem. We've put in procedures in place to fix it. It's getting better already. So it's even though the quota remains, there's a process where it's getting better.
The thing that, I think is to be seen is the fact that, for 4 days after we got back from Sundance, we were lucky to get this social impact filmmaking award, and the chief of department put out a message to all uniformed officers, basically saying, in case anyone's wondering, there's no quota, there never has been. You'll be disciplined if you enforce one. And then 2 weeks after that, Commissioner O'Neill actually put out another memo saying all uniformed officers will be required to take no quota training, and then essentially sent out another reminder, in case you don't know, there's no quota. So I think, not to be cheeky, but, we have to ask, what is that? Are those seeds to then kind of plant to set up a disinformation campaign and say, well, we've been addressing the issue for a long time now, we're very aware of it, and we're closely monitoring the situation. And incidentally, all of these guys here are lazy because they would not do their job because, you have to arrest people and you have to summons people, and that is the measurement of a good cop or a bad cop, and they, these are clearly lazy, troublemaking, bad apple cops. Every department has them. Is that going to happen or not? I mean, that's the question. Or will there be a sincere conversation about this? Because, these are not the first, and we've had hundreds of people in just the sort of festival release tour, NYPD and nationally, coming up to all of us and saying, thank you for sharing your story. I'm going through the same problem. I think, Emeka, you told me once that right after you announced at the press conference, was it 800? You got 800 calls from law enforcement in the NYPD that...
It wasn't 800, but it was quite a few calls.
You told me 800. So you're trying to impress me. You said hundreds then, we'll say for the sake of this.
It was hundreds.
Yeah. But that corroborated the claims of the class action, and then at the end of the call, when you asked, well, would you be willing to join? I said, oh, no. I mean, that sounds scary.
That's a different thing altogether.
Yeah. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of indication of where things are at. I mean, this idea of the blue wall of silence, these guys have demystified that this is a line you cannot cross. And it absolutely is, and this is a conversation that we hope the department will engage sincerely, because they are good. I've spent years with these guys. Right. They give a shit.
Well, I got a problem saying the department's being sincere, and I'm gonna show you why. This film, you see all these video recordings secretly being done, uncovering this corruption, okay? The department has now put out a patrol guide procedure stating that cops cannot record. So they can't make an audio recording of anybody in the department. Like, let's say he's doing something illegal and I recorded it, you can't do that. You'll be disciplined. Now, New York state law states, under Criminal Procedure Law 700.01, under eavesdropping, it states that this is a one-party state. You're allowed to record. So they wrote a procedure that violates New York state law so that corruption cannot be exposed. And if you don't believe me, ask Edwin. Am I right, Edwin?
Just to add, I question the sincerity of these cosmetic efforts.
Yep.
Because as an active member, I can tell you, Charles, and everyone here, everything that the quota system that they say never existed, incentivized, continues to be incentivized. So you can't say we have abandoned this system that we never admitted that we had in the first place, and yet everything, that officer that still polices as if there is a quota is the one that will be detective, is the one that's going to get into that coveted unit. So that's why I question the sincerity of these efforts. It's shocking to hear the commissioner, state that we don't engage in quota policing. It's shocking, especially coming up from the Kelly and Bloomberg era. It's shocking to hear and see, but I question the sincerity of it.
Also, I'd like to add, what the police But the fear that Steve was talking about, that cops are very scared because from the academy they teach you that the police department is a big boogeyman, that they're going to get you, they can do whatever they want to you, so don't fight, just go with the program.
Wait. How do they teach that? How does that come up in the academy? Is that just word of mouth? Is that an instructor?
From the instructor, from the gym instructor to the class instructor, to your training sergeant, to your training officer, they all say the same thing. Watch out, this job, it will get you. Just stay under the radar, follow the game, play the game. That's the slang that we have, which means to follow the system, play along, and you'll be okay. If you go against that grain, and your life will be over. They can fire you for anything because they don't follow the rules. If you hit what Manny was saying, of a unit that's corrupt, you can't expect them to uncorrupt themselves or to rid the corrupting themselves. You need somebody over them, watching them, to correct their flaws, to correct their mistakes, and even take legal actions against them if they refuse to correct it.
And we don't have that mechanism now. That's the problem. This is why, I went and started writing this with Frank to make this happen. We have to come up with another way of generating $900 million a year, not on the backs of all these people. That's the problem. We need to change that.
I think one of the troubling things that has to be considered is that when there's bad policy, the ones who are on the receiving end of that are the rank and file officers who are on the front lines. And so, what these amazing individuals are trying to draw attention to is the fact that, the policy, if improved and if sincerely discussed, right, we're talking about the quota policy and also, in a larger sense, this lack of accountability, where there's no channel, there's no legally sustainable channel for officers to speak about corruption or violation of law. This creates a situation that is harmful not for just the public, but for rank and file officers. And so, there's nothing anti-police about this. There's nothing anti-law enforcement. This is about improving law enforcement at a moment when the nation could not be more divided on this issue of race and policing.
That's right.
So I think we have run out of time. I want to thank you guys. I don't know if you have increased my hopefulness or crushed it to the ground. But I would like to thank you for coming and thank you for making this fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.